Let's just say it out loud. Most people who still defend MAGA don't believe half of what they're saying. They're scared to death of admitting they were conned. Because once you admit you were fooled here, you have to ask what else in your life isn't real. Listen, this episode isn't an attack. It's an intervention for anyone who feels the tension in their gut but hasn't had the courage to name it. Let's get it. Hey, welcome back to another episode. Episode 6, I believe we are on now. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. We're up to 93 subscribers. Maybe we can get beyond 100 this week. That would be awesome. 100 subscribers would be fantastic. Always like, subscribe, leave a comment below. But let's get into it today. I want to do a little something different, maybe a little different tone, a little different tenor than what I've done in the last couple of episodes. I know the last episode was pretty intense, but I stand 10 toes down on business on that episode. Today, I want to just take a moment, maybe a bit of an intervention for MAGA. So MAGA, listen, if you're out there and you're listening, listen to me. Lean in a little bit with me for a moment, because this episode is for you. If you have family or friends who are caught in the MAGA movement cult, send this to them. But just hang with me to the end of this if you could. If you're a MAGA, hang to the end with me. Oh, and by the way, when I say, hey, if this is for you, MAGA, I'm not talking about the right-wing pundits. I'm not talking about this administration or any of the people in the cabinet of MAGA or any of Congress people or senators who are MAGA people. I'm not talking about those people. I'm not talking about MAGA influencers. I'm talking about the average American who has been caught up in this MAGA movement. This episode is for you. And the reason why I wanted to do this episode is I had a conversation with a friend recently, and the question was posed to me, like, what do you think, why do you think these folks that we know, family members, friends, who were Republicans, conservatives, but ethical ones, ones with morals, got drawn into this MAGA movement and continue to stay after incident after incident after incident is uncovered, after all the evidence that you can imagine has been amassed against this president, and they still will carry water for him. They still will twist themselves in pretzels to make excuses for him. Why do you think they stay? That was the question that was asked. And as I thought about it, I thought to myself, I think really it's not so much the ideologies of this president that's causing them to stay. I think there's a lot of fear involved in why so many just average Americans, people who were just good old-fashioned Republicans, decided to stay with such a vile movement, such a vile president. And that brought me to think about this episode in particular, about this sort of MAGA intervention. And so the first thing I thought about when they asked me that question was this thing of shame, and shame leads to fear, and fear leads to control. So there's something about this idea of that if I've supported someone who is antithetical to what I said I believed before. Like, it's really put some of them, I think, in a bit of a conundrum because they don't want to be seen as hypocrites. And so they might have this shame because they supported someone who has turned out to be so vile. Now, those who were paying attention knew all along that this guy was vile, knew all along that the ends would not justify the means. But They got caught up in that, and there's this shame about, I decided to back someone, and now I'm ashamed that I backed this person. But now that shame is producing in me a fear that if I'm wrong here, where else can I be wrong? And that fear can become so strong that it will control the way I behave from here on out, especially in regards to that particular movement. And here's the thing, authoritarians don't control people with logic. That's just not how it works. They control people with shame, with fear, with social pressure. Like, they intend, authoritarian leaders use these tools intentionally to shackle their followers to them. Shame keeps you quiet. Fear keeps you obedient to the cause, and control keeps you from remembering that you were once free. You were once able to make decisions for yourself, that you didn't have to sort of get in line for what the talking points are for your particular party or following. And that is the power of an authoritarian. That is the power of someone who knows how to manipulate and con people. They use it as a tool to their advantage. And I think a lot of my friends, family members, acquaintances, a lot of pastors and leaders who maybe had good intentions. I'm trying to write the best story I can, the most gracious story I can for the average MAGA supporter, that maybe they did have some good intentions. But surely, as they see the things that are happening with this administration, as they see how ICE is operating out in the streets, they see how much this president has been um, benefiting himself, enriching himself at the expense of the American people, at the expense of the White House, breaking through any sort of boundary or precedence that has ever been set before. Like, none of that matters. He's doing anything that he wants to do. And of course, what is happening with the Epstein files, and the reality is that most of us knew that he was in the files, and a significant part of those files. And now as they come out, we see what's happening here, right? But I think that you got to remember that there was a time, MAGA, listen to me, there was a time that you were free to have political opinions that were contrary to your party, that you were free to think for yourself about policies, about ways in which we presented ourselves to the world, domestically, internationally, the ways in which we were governed, that you had the ability to sit with people who had differing views or opinions than you, and were able to discuss those views and opinions without name calling. But that's the thing, right? Shame, fear, and social pressure. That's how perfectly intelligent, good, moral people get trapped in something they would have laughed at 10 years ago. People don't stay because the story holds up, because it's not hard to prove that the story doesn't hold up. The Make America Great Again story, the Donald Trump savior of America story, does not hold up. They don't stay because the story holds up. They stay because the cost of leaving is unbearable. Let's talk a little bit about that. The first is the fear of being wrong. Now, Mark Twain said this: it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. What an apt quote for this time for MAGA folks. Because as hard as we try to explain to them how much of a con this president is, it was so much easier for them to fall into, to be fooled by this con man, than for them to be convinced that they have been conned by, mind you, perhaps one of the greatest con men in American history, for being honest. Not many con men have conned their way all the way to the highest position of authority within the country, not once, but twice, and the second time after mounting an insurrection against said country. Pretty significant. Fear of being wrong, being fooled for them feels, or for all of us really, being fooled feels like failure. Like like there's a crack in our identity. And that is a problem with placing our identity in a political party in the way in which MAGA has done so. It's not to say that you don't support a political party or you don't lean left or lean right. Like that's fine. That we're just picking ways in which we feel like is the best way to govern our nation for the sake of the people of the nation. Like, so I get that. But that's not what this is. That's not what this is at all. Like, I would never protect any politician, left, right, or middle, who is implicated so heavily in something like the Epstein files. But when you've bought the hat and you bought all the t-shirts and you fly the flags on your trucks, and now your identity is in this sort of red hat, conservative MAGA, conservative Republican, or whatever you call it, and that is your full-on identity now politically, that's really tough. Because if you admit that you've been fooled, now that entire identity is a disaster. There's fear, I think, also of losing community. That MAGA folks are afraid that they're going to lose community when your church or your family, your friends, your coworkers, they all are orbit the same sort of belief system as you. Leaving isn't just an ideological decision, actually feels like it might be some sort of social suicide, like that you now have to lose friendships. And listen, that's very real. There are some people who will never leave the MAGA movement. Period. They will go to their grave believing that Donald Trump was the best president in the history of the United States of America, that he was doing good for the people. That's just going to be the case. And so there might be some people you will have to walk away from. I have walked away from people because they chose that Donald Trump or being MAGA was more important than the relationship. So fear of losing community, fear of uncertainty. This is a huge one. Why? Because MAGA sort of provides this like simple answers to complex issues, complex problems. Is there a fentanyl problem in the United States of America? For sure. Is there an immigration problem in the United States of America? In my opinion, the immigration system is broken. So there is definitely a problem. I wouldn't say that it's the immigrants that have created the problem. It is our system that is the problem, but there is a problem there. And what MAGA does is they come and they try to provide these very simplistic solutions to very complex problems. And to stay in MAGA is because you're afraid of the uncertainty of the complexity of those problems. So it's easier to be like, hey, there's heroes and there's villains. The MAGA are the heroes and the libs, they're villains. There's good guys and there's bad guys, right? What this will require to leave MAGA would require embracing this idea of complexity and ambiguity and being okay with hearing someone else's opinion about politics and being able to sit with those opinions and think deeply about those alongside your own and then make a decision from there, which one carries the most weight. And then there's the fear of the domino effect. This is another big fear that I think MAGA Christians have. And what is that? Or not MAGA Christians, well, both. MAGA Christians are just MAGA Republicans. The fear of the domino effect is that if you fooled me here in this moment, and if I admit that, what else then collapses? What other dominoes will fall if I was wrong here? And it makes it really hard, I think, for people, again, average people who got caught up in this MAGA movement to do some self-reflection and recognize how toxic and how bad this administration has been for the country and for them. They literally voted against their own interests. The more I was thinking about it, I was reminded of the parable, and I'm sure you've heard this parable before. The parable is the emperor's new clothes. I would imagine you've heard this. I think it's Hans Christian Andersen parable. But if you haven't, just a quick, brief deal. There is an emperor, two conmen come into town, and they convince the emperor that they can sew for him or weave for him this clothing, the most beautiful clothing that's ever been made, very expensive but very opulent, rich clothing that's ever been made. But here's the catch: fools or unworthy people can't actually see the clothing. So these magical clothes, these expensive, opulent garments that they can create for the emperor, um, that they could be his, but the fools can't see them. It's invisible to fools. Um, and the emperor like buys into this. And not only does the emperor buy into this con that they're going to make him these clothes that can't be seen by fools, so does the emperor's advisors. So do all the people, the public around the emperor. They all buy into this. And so the con men go into pretending to weave these garments for the emperor. And finally, the day comes for the emperor to reveal his new clothes. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And what does the emperor do? Because he's afraid to speak out loud that he doesn't see the clothes, because remember, only fools or the unworthy can't see the clothes. All of the advisors are afraid to claim that there are no clothes. We are being conned because only fools can't see the clothes. The public are afraid to say there are no clothes here because only fools can't see the clothes. So the big reveal day comes, and what does the emperor do? He has a parade. And the emperor begins to march down the street of his kingdom naked. I mean, naked, naked. And everyone is cheering. Everyone is pretending. They're all excited that what beautiful clothes you have. Hail to the emperor. Oh, lovely new garments you have. All of them can see everything because he's naked. But nobody wants to be seen as a fool because they've been conned. And as he's walking down the street naked, and everyone pretends that the lie is the truth. Why? Why are they pretending that the lie is the truth? Because they're terrified of what it means to say out loud, this is absurd. They are terrified to look at their neighbor, their friend, their fellow citizen and be like, this is absurd. The emperor is naked. They're afraid to say it. Why? Shame traps people in groupthink. And they're all afraid. They're all shameful. They all think that they could be seen as a fool if they call out the fact that it is absurd that the emperor is walking down the street naked. So they say nothing. They cheer on the emperor. And what happens in the parable? All of a sudden, a child appears. And the child begins to declare, the emperor is naked, or the emperor has no clothes. And the child did not do that because he was trying to break down some sort of barrier, had some sort of revelation or some sort of like release from his inhibitions. No, the child did it simply because the child was living without any social fear. There was no social anxiety for the child. So the child said what the child saw. You've probably experienced that before in your life, where a child says something that probably is not the most appropriate thing to say, but the child is saying what the child is seeing. The child makes the declaration. All of a sudden, it begins to go through all of the crowd. The emperor is naked. The emperor is naked. The emperor is naked. And the town realizes, and the emperor realizes that indeed they were conned. And in this MAGA world, I think the average MAGA person, I feel this, the average MAGA person sees the absurdity of Donald Trump and this administration, sees the absurdity of what's going on. But the social cost of being the first one to say the emperor is naked is too high. The first one to jump out and break through and say, I'm leaving this movement because the emperor is naked. I'm leaving this movement because the emperor is vile. I am leaving this movement because the emperor is in the Epstein files. You get what I'm saying? And what happens in that parable and just in general, right, with shame, fear, and control and this movement of MAGA, and I'm trying my best not to call it a cult, although I do think that it is a cult. I don't want to throw stones at you. That's not my goal here, MAGA people, because I think you've been caught in this psychological warfare, this DARVO scenario. And if you don't know what DARVO is, it's a psychological term about where um, this narcissist abuser um, uses this technique to deny, attack, and then reverse the victim and offender. It's how they function and operate. That DARVO is very much being used. The psychological warfare is being used against America and against MAGA in particular. When we talk about it, like how do we see that? Well, first of all, deny. When anything comes up about Trump, what Trump has said, what Trump has done, like you can go all the way back from 2016 and even before that. What does Trump do? We never said that. Denies, right? We never said that. That didn't happen. There was no wrongdoing. You look at something like the Hollywood Access Hollywood bus when uh, Trump said what he said on the bus. You can look at the January 6th insurrection that in their mind, there was no, it was all love. It was all love, according to them. That didn't happen. We never said that. We never told them that we're going to go down and take over the Capitol. No, no, no. We didn't say that. There was no wrongdoing here, right? So you deny. Then you move from denying into attacking. So anyone who questions the movement becomes the real threat. Then they get to be labeled like a traitor or you're woke or you're part of the deep state. You're currently seeing this right now as Marjorie Taylor Greene tries to find herself and sort of rewrite her own story as she's come onto the side more of Democrats regarding what's happening in the Epstein files and the shutdown and the economy. Her eyes are sort of being opened a little bit there. It's not to say that she's a good person. I don't think that she is a good person, but she's come onto the side. And so what has happened? Donald Trump has been attacking her. Matter of fact, he labeled her Marjorie Taylor Brown, but when that joke didn't land, he had to describe that green grass turns brown when it's rotting. He switched it up quickly to being Marjorie Trader Green. What is he doing? He's attacking DARVO. And then lastly in DARVO is reverse victim and offender. So the movement then, like MAGA or Donald Trump, then cast themselves as the persecuted ones. Russia, Russia, Russia. It's a hoax. What is he doing? He's casting himself as being persecuted, casting himself now as the victim. Now, all of these women who were at the time children, who were trafficked in horrific ways, they're not the victims. Donald Trump is the victim. He's being persecuted here. Accountability for them at this stage of DARVO, accountability becomes persecution. Consequences become tyranny in their mind. Reality becomes oppression. So the reason why Donald Trump has released all of the J6ers and pardoned everybody who was convicted of crimes on January 6th, the reason why he is going after all of the people who investigated January 6th is that he's trying to DARVO it. He's trying to reverse the victim and offender. He's trying to, where people were held accountable, he said they were persecuted. Where people had consequences in prison, he's saying, well, the government was used in a tyrannical way, weaponized against these citizens, and so therefore they should be set free. It's where shame becomes weaponized and fear becomes organized and control is disguised as loyalty. Now lean in with me for a second here, MAGA. I want you to hear this as clearly as you can. MAGA, you're not stupid. You're not weak. You're not broken. You were targeted. You were targeted by one of the greatest con men in American history. Let me say it again. You're not stupid. You're not weak. You're not broken. You were targeted. Authoritarian movements prey on good people, people who want security, people who want identity and purpose and who want belonging. They prey on those kinds of people. So here's the invitation to you. You are allowed to question the MAGA movement. You are allowed to feel discomfort about what this administration has been doing to you and to your neighbors. You're allowed to say, I was wrong. It's not weakness. That, my friends, is maturity. Again, I'm going to say it again. You're not stupid. You're not weak. You're not broken. You were targeted. You were conned. But you can come out of it. Mark Twain was right when he said, it is easier to fool someone than to convince them they've been fooled. But once you admit it, once you let yourself see that you were conned, that you have been fooled, that you've been taken advantage of, that you've been targeted, once you see it, and once you let yourself see it, the shame loses its power. The fear loses its grip on you. And the control breaks open, and now all of a sudden you are free to be who you were before you were taken advantage of by the MAGA movement. So maybe a bit of an intervention for you, for your family, your friends. Maybe for those of you who aren't MAGA, this helps us navigate some of the waters that we're going to need to navigate with the holidays coming up and being around those folks, rather than maybe calling them stupid, rather than maybe getting so angry and upset. Find a new way to sort of reveal the fact that they were targeted by a con man. They're not stupid. They're not weak. They're not broken. They were targeted. They were conned. I'd love to know what you think about it. Leave your comments below. Again, share this video. If you have a MAGA friend or family member or somebody you think it might help, share this with them. Subscribe. Let's try to get to 100+ subscribers by the end of the week. That would be awesome. I'd love to talk about that next week on the podcast. But that's all I got for you today. I'll see you next week.